Okay, hi, I'm Jeremy Tyrrell from UNC Wilmington, and the title of my talk is Engaging Ethical Scholarly Production Through Open Digital Collaboration. So I'd like to tell you about a project my co-writer Nathaniel Rivers and I are undertaking that engages some ethical issues related to scholarly production and publication. So to provide an overview of what we're doing, the project's a content analysis of Amazon Mechanical Turk job posts, sometimes called human intelligence tasks or HITs, to determine how they rhetorically depict human actants. So to clarify what that means, if you're not familiar with Mechanical Turk, are folks familiar with Mechanical Turk? Sort of? Great. It's Amazon's distributed crowdsource platform that allows anybody to complete brief, mundane tasks for very little money. You can see some examples here. Here we have filling out a market research survey for a penny, right? Describing televisual content, in this case the television shows Castle and Friends, right? Writing up what you're seeing for a few pennies. Drawing 3D shapes inside of objects given a provided UI. That is a bonus of 70 cents, it looks like, which doesn't sound like a lot until we see the range, right? A penny to 65 cents in this list. And this is just a snippet, of course, of what is a fire hose of posts. So you might wonder, who would do this? But a study from last year found that about 180,000 distinct workers are on Turk, not simultaneously, but are active. They're mostly in the US, which is perhaps counterintuitive, and mostly making less than minimum wage in the aggregate, right? Because your whole goal here would be to do as many as you can as fast as you can. There's no shortage of articles questioning the ethics of that arrangement, of course. MTurk is also hooked into academia, both as a pool of human subjects and as a topic of examination. If you haven't used MTurk as a research tool, you might, if you're interested in this topic, talk to your IRB people. IRB, they're familiar with MTurk because particularly in the social sciences, a lot of those things like with questionnaires, surveys, used to just take a Psych 101 class and run them through it. Now they push this kind of work onto Mechanical Turk. So there are, this is a book that sort of talks about how to do this, right? A guidebook for it. Here's an article, same thing. This is a humanities project where they had Turkers read snippets in 19th century novels and map out emotions, sort of what was the emotional tenor of this piece, and then where is that geographically. You'll also see works that are kind of a little expressing some consternation about this. In part sort of its validity, but then also, the ethics of this, right? So you see a lot, ones that start having question marks in them, right? This was a brief write-up about how bots may be compromising psych studies because, of course, if you just want to get through a survey, it doesn't matter what you put down, you just have to finish the survey. That sounds like something you could automate, right? So bots potentially are filling out those psych surveys. And potentially changing the information we get. So despite this academic attention, Rhetoric Studies has limited engagement with MTurk, even though it collects a body of texts that exert multiple forms of persuasion and reveal multiple forms of actants. What's illuminating about them, too, is hits aren't too mundane for machines. It's not a difference of degree, right? It's even too mundane for a machine. It's not that. It's that they're mundane in ways that are non-trivial for machines, but trivial for us, right? So those distinctions are informative regarding the respective purviews of human and non-human actants and the resulting implications of our impressions of those things. So that entanglement and separation speaks to the origin of the term Mechanical Turk, right? So the original Mechanical Turk, which was a thing, it's sometimes called the Turk, was an 18th century device, and actually into the 19th century, that purported to be an autonomous chess-playing machine. It toured Europe and America, supposedly beating Napoleon and Ben Franklin. Not popularly disclosed at the time, though, was that the machine concealed a human chess player inside its chassis. Most, but not all, of its mechanical workings were a subterfuge. Actually, it was a pretty sophisticated device, but it wasn't exactly what it was purported to be. Since that time, the term Mechanical Turk has come to be associated with examples of seemingly fantastic automation that are dependent upon concealed human labor. And this is relevant in things like, here's Alexa. When you say Alexa, this We assume that's just a machine learning algorithm doing all this. Humans are listening to many of those, in some cases to correct what Alexa is doing. This is Google Duplex. This is an assistant where you can say, Google, could you give me a reservation at that restaurant next Thursday, and it would just do it. They demoed this using machine learning, but sometimes it's just a person calling up for you. This was a write-up about Google's assistant, which is like Siri, but the one Google does. The sort of pull quote here is, artificial intelligence is not that artificial, it's human beings that are doing the work. And Amazon itself describes Mechanical Turk as artificial intelligence, right? It's faked artificial intelligence. However, that pejorative connotation of falsehood or deception neglects that these entities are coalitions of human and non-human elements, right? It presumes particular notions of intelligence and anthropocentric conditions of control, right? Who's in charge here? We commonly distance ourselves from machines through lofty or abstract abilities, right? Reason, morality, ethics, metacognition, these sort of abstract notions of we can do grandiose things that the simple machine can't do. But in MTurk's economic trenches of mundane tasks, we can see concrete, pragmatic conceptions of difference, right? We're here at the other end of the spectrum. You can really see where the rubber meets the road. So our goal in our project is to trace how the human emerges in the language of hits, right? The job descriptions themselves. What's the depiction of human that emerges from that? So that's what we're doing, but I mostly actually want to talk to you about how we're doing it. Our goals in our project are to foster a broader coalition of human and non-human actants by composing publicly and incorporating in-progress contribution rather than retroactive peer comments, right? And to establish a durable archive of what we're calling paratexts, all the ancillary documents that support, a finished product of scholarship. So more specifically, the whole project unfolds through regular public streaming video sessions as we move through the composition process from initial concept to completed manuscript, right? So we have regular meetings where we essentially do this labor publicly. Outside viewers may participate in these discussions, which are archived with associated materials like our textual exchanges, the research materials, links, those kinds of things. And those are all publicly shared, as is the article draft, which is posted online and open to comments as it develops. Right? So to do this, we've partnered with Enculturation Intermezzo, the online disciplinary publication. They've provided access to the Manifold collaborative scholarly platform. Excuse me. So this is our project page following Mechanical Turks. And here are some of the shared texts we've got so far. These are the main sort of project mechanisms of the work. And the videos look as you might imagine as we talk our way through the labor and share materials in real time. So just briefly, I
think you need to use the remote.
Oh, is it muted?
Yeah, it's muted.
The sort of point you made here.
Yeah, so the point I was making as is mentioned early in the abstract, not a lot of work being done on this within rhetorical studies.
But we get the gist of how this works. So my co-author and I, and going forward, guests and also anyone who wants to participate, work through the production of a draft and all of that that comes with it as well. Shift away here. Yeah, so as I said, viewers can participate in these sessions. At this point, however, we have not made public announcements that these are going on because the first few were essentially us setting up, what is it that we're doing and how are we doing it. We're now ready to announce our public schedule with our publisher. They're basically, during the summer, they're every other Tuesday at 11 Eastern, where we have a regular meeting time. When we're dealing with invited guests, sometimes that'll change because they may not be able to meet them, but we will have that regular schedule. And in addition to the video discussions being open, as I mentioned, we're going to have guests as we encounter things in the work that, how do we understand this? Who can we talk to about this? We're going to have other people participate in these discussions as well. We've had one so far, but as I mentioned, everything is preliminary right now.
they're being brought in to kind of participate in the project.
This is with our publisher,
Invitation-based.
that's Jeff Rice,
Those
he's
can also
over
become
Intermezzo.
promotional materials for the project.
You make public what you're doing in progress and hope that other people will want to be involved.
Yep. Particularly if we get, interesting, compelling,
My contribution to that was, yep, I do more. So that's kind of the main mechanism of how things unfold. We don't want to release any specific names, but for example, in terms of other guests we have coming, in the sort of preliminary process, my co-author and I resolved that cultural techniques would be an appropriate theoretical tool. So we're talking to someone right now who can come and be a guest expert, talk about what that is, how it would apply to this kind of work. Another guest is from IRB to talk to us about, because their familiarity with Mechanical Turk as a tool, and there's a different notion of, and we just sort of remarked about this, what human subjects are in IRB versus the human that emerges in Mechanical Turk, right? There's going to be a slippage between those concepts.
Yeah. Which talks to what Erica was saying before.
What's that?
I was just saying it talks to what Erica was saying before about how their subjects were not human subjects.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, we can talk about, is that pejorative? I mean, is it descriptive? What does that mean? And so all of this material is being collected and publicly shared, establishing a durable archive of paratexts that support the finished scholarly product. And as I mentioned, the manuscript draft itself will be public and include feedback features, highlighting and annotating, to allow for distributed contribution. And we see this as a partnership among multiple humans and non-human actants. So that's how we're doing our project, basically. I'd also like to address why we're doing things that way to engage with some of the ethical issues here. And none of the things I'm going to be addressing are, I don't think, novel. I'm a journal editor myself, and most electronic publications are grappling with a lot of these sort of questions that I'll be looking at here. Let me just switch over to my presentation. Here we go. So these are some of our goals, right? This is why we're doing what we're doing. We'd like to engage with new forms of peer review that allow diverse contributions to shape the project as it develops rather than retroactively, right? We've got a draft here, some comments. We want contribution as it goes, pull it in different directions. And to enable transparent auditing of the composition process or the composing process. So peer review, this first one, is in many ways still yoked to an older model. There's nothing wrong with that, but it works with finalized text, right? Stable drafts. And often we're talking about a very small subset that represents the field, right? 2 reviewers, that's the field. There's been, of course, attempts to leverage different technologies in order to get greater distribution to a larger slice of the field in rhetoric studies, and then also outside. This is a write-up about the chemistry journal Sinlet that moved to a crowdsourced model. It's still very much sort of finished text, now review stage, but the reviewers, there's hundreds essentially rather than 1 or 2. And the tasks they're doing are a little bit scaled down to make that manageable. There are also preprint examples like Archive, and probably many of us are familiar with Archive. So these are things that have not yet gone to print. However, Archive doesn't include things like commenting features. It is working with stabilized drafts, and it is moderated. Right? And then there's also post-publication peer review done through services like PubPeer. Right? So this gives commenting features to online journals that don't have them. You take your conversation to a third party. However, these examples use retroactive frameworks in which a draft is completed and then evaluated by a body. And in those frameworks, comments are almost inherently punitive, even when they're very nice. Their job is to say, why didn't you do this? Or here's what needs to be here. Right? I mean, that's what the job of that comment is. So we'd like to engage with peer review models that are perhaps closer to the ways we hopefully like to teach, right? Ones that incorporate diverse ideas in progress, not at the end. So there may be a shift here in what we're doing from peer review to peer produce, right? Peer review to peer production. Regarding the second point, diverse contributions, scholarship tends to develop in secret in a lot of ways, right? When I was originally talking with people about this project, I was kind of surprised that a few of them said, why would people share their ideas publicly where they could be stolen? Right? And it seems like that's maybe an unusual way to think about things. You know, if it's research, you know, you want those ideas to be used, but you know, there are also material realities there in terms of your idea getting stolen, right? That exists because it's real. However, doing something like this, we think, it helps you establish a form of prior art, right? It stakes a claim, I'm doing this, and I've got a record that stretches back to that. So, you know, if it comes to it, you can demonstrate that, but also perhaps people who are thinking along these same lines, instead of competing, would be brought into the project, right? Now we're working together. I mean, there's an infinite number of seats at the table. This kind of secrecy also hinders diverse input and a diverse writ large, right, of ideas, of perspectives, of bodies. It hinders diverse input, and it ends up kind of becoming a ex post facto check, right? Why didn't you think of this scholar? Why didn't you consider this? That happens at the end, rather than guiding it, right? If you really want to use diversity, it should be a guiding force, not a gate at the end. Our thinking is potentially that adversarial peer contribution may be beneficial. We all have sort of glib stories about reviewer number two, right? I mean, that's a trope now. You've got the one person who's coming along with you and one person who either has some kind of axe to grind or something like that. Potentially get that person involved earlier rather than later, right? If this is meaningful, let's deal with it as it's in progress rather than as a gotcha at the end. And then finally, creating a durable archive of production materials should facilitate auditing the production process. It's always good practice to be transparent about your research choices, which can in some cases address questions of method or even bias, right? Here's why we did what we did, and there's a full record of it. Texts also commonly appear as finished products, shorn of the traces of what brought them to their current state. This is well known, right? I mean, the finished text has this sort of ghost behind it. And this could help us better address that. It is the case that more data isn't always better. I mean, if it's just more noise. But we're now in a position where we can archive and potentially collate these kinds of texts more effectively. Right? We now have non-human actants that can help us do these things. So even though this project will produce a finished product, right, it ends in a paper, its main work, its real text, is the process and the archive. That's what we consider to be the real work of it. So to close, although the project is incipient, we have some preliminary findings. One of them is writing publicly is challenging. This is, if you've heard of this was a novel. It was an adaptation of the Pickwick Papers called Pickwick. The author, Joshua Cohen, had a scheduled time where he used this platform where he was on camera and writing this book, and there was a chat space right next to him. And so publicly, he's writing a novel with 100 people on his shoulder. Why did you write that? Don't you think you should do this? It sounds terrifying, right? In fact, he hasn't done it again. So writing publicly can be, terrifying, right? That you're putting something out there that you feel is not in a finished state. Anonymity in this kind of structure seems infeasible, right? I mean, how can you be on video meeting with someone and preserve anonymity for peer review, right? Sophisticated video scrambling. I mean, I don't really know. Right? It's tricky to try and think, how would you retain anonymity? Because of that, this model may lend itself to deployments that are closer to something like a monograph, where you have a proposal that's anonymous, but the work itself is not, than something like a journal publication, where anonymity you try to preserve throughout. Right? I mean, you try and preserve at least until the finished manuscript is submitted. Diversity requires critical mass. So we found that targeting people and asking them to be guests, academics love to do that. They want to talk about ideas, particularly ideas where they have a good footing and they can expand them into new places, right? However, we're still kind of wrestling with things like institutional credit. I mean, we're kind of under a model of two principal investigators and then other contributors, but where's the line? I mean, if you're a special guest or you a contributor, what if you go and change the draft a little bit or add a few comments? I mean, we don't have the mechanisms institutionally to even apportion credit for this kind of thing. Also, identifying folks, it's a kind of a catch-22 or an unknown unknown. It's like we can only reach out to the people that we know about, right? If you really want diverse perspectives, we need folks who we don't know about. And how are we going to contact them without knowing about them, or unless they happen to encounter our work, right? So there's a sort of weird catch-22. It's like I can only talk to the people I already kind of know about. even with the publisher's help, trying to identify, here are some folks who might be relevant here. And then just quickly, the last few here. Non-humans are meaningful contributors, right? The CMS and the collaborative tools that we're using are significant, and the archive's construction, of course, is thoroughly rhetorical. What it can and can't do, what it prompts, those sorts of things. Technological requirements are modest. That being said, we're using Manifold, but something like this could be set up really quickly using a lot of other services, right? You just need something online as a repository, and then potentially, a video service, a video conference service, and then maybe something with like wiki and commenting features. You can do this through Google Docs and, for the time being, Hangouts on Air, although that Google's killing that. So you can actually do this pretty easily. Scaling, however, would require, as I mentioned, institutional revision. So there's a fair amount of labor that's non-scholarly that goes into this. I have to do a lot of production assistant work, and I'm not sure that's going to count. That's not going to be institutionally valued, right? And then also, as I mentioned, ramping up this kind of thing probably would be beyond. It's not like you could roll this out for everything we do. The scale is just too much. There's a lot of upfront labor. Also, you lose anonymity, these kinds of things. It's just not a perfect fit for every situation. Right? It's probably a better fit for things that are monograph-like rather than regular journal practice. So that's all I've got. That's where we are. If you're interested in this project, I do have some QR codes that'll take you to the project page. As I mentioned, we're essentially announcing publicly, probably when I get back. And we'd love to have you participate. All right, thank you.
Thanks.